God does things, and when we take note of him, or when we put our faith and our trust in him that he's going to speak to us, suddenly we start hearing, suddenly we start seeing God do things. And it's not that we're looking for, like looking for demons and doorknobs, or looking for God in things that aren't God. But if we've got our ear open and we're willing to hear him talk, suddenly sometimes we start to see God sharing with us just as a normal father would share with his son. And it becomes more real to understand that the nature of God that we read about in the Bible is actually true. If things come that are confirmations against who God is, we know it's not God. But when things come and they line up with who God is, then we should challenge that thing and go and talk to Dad and say, Dad, is this you? What are you trying to say to me? And in the Bible, there are many stories that seem strange, or they seem very trivial, or they seem quite small, maybe 3-4 verses. And you wonder why they're there. There's nothing in the Bible that isn't there for a reason. It's been left there that we can take note of it, and we can go back to it and read it and understand something more about how we should be walking, about who God is, about the mistakes made by others that we can learn from. The scriptures have been retained and kept secure for us for a particular reason. And the Holy Spirit has secured them so that we can have them today. So today we're going to look at a very simple scripture. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 17 from verse 24. So if you've got your Bible here, let's turn to that. It's a very, very short story, just a couple of verses. And it's an interesting story because it doesn't actually follow on and show you what happened afterwards. But I believe that because it was put there in this way, I can understand that God actually fulfilled what was in there, because Jesus said this is what's going to happen, and I'm pretty sure it happened. But only Matthew records this. And it's a story about the temple tax. In Matthew chapter 17, verse 24, it starts off with, when they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter, and they said, does your teacher not pay the taxes? And he said, yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others? And when he said from others, Jesus said to him, then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take it and give it to them for me and for yourself. Simple little story. Sounds almost like a fairy tale. No, it's a Jesus tale. It's a story of something miraculous. But it doesn't go on and say, well, then Peter went and he threw in a hook and he pulled out a fish. When you watch it on an animated or a dramatized version of the Bible, they show Peter waddling down to the edge of the sea and he's throwing his line, and he opens his fish's mouth, and we don't know if it's a St. Peter's fish or what kind of fish it was, but when he pulls it out, there's a coin in its mouth. The point isn't whether it happened or not, but I'm pretty sure it must have if it's recorded that Jesus said it was going to. But the point is that it's been retained here for us to take note of. So if we look at it, it's our good friend Peter again, the one who is always so keen to open his mouth. And in this case, he does that exact thing again. He opens his mouth very quickly. The temple tax was something applied to every adult male Jew. They were all supposed to pay it, and the faithful followers did. Every year it was paid at Passover in Jerusalem, or alternatively, if you lived abroad, not in Jerusalem, and you couldn't get to the city, you would pay it the month before when the tax collectors came around and they received it. If you were a Sadducee, you weren't keen to pay it. If you were someone from Qumran, you paid it once in your whole lifetime, and that was it. But the rest of the Jews would pay it if they were faithful to the traditions and to the law that bound them. Now, Peter, of course, gets asked, does your teacher pay this tax? Okay? What does that imply? They're asking Peter, does your teacher pay? Who's the teacher? It's Jesus. So that means that the people, even the tax collectors, had recognized Jesus as a teacher. Does Rabbi Jesus pay this tax? By saying that, they immediately exempted Jesus from having to pay the tax because a rabbi didn't have to pay it, and nor did a priest. But strange, isn't that? Does your rabbi pay? So maybe they called him rabbi because he was someone that taught them, but they didn't believe that he actually was a rabbi. But by also asking that, does he pay the tax? They were saying, does he regularly pay this tax? Does he do it every year? Perhaps they're referring to the time before Jesus was a rabbi, because he didn't just come up from 13 years of age and get stuck in Torah school and work his way through Torah school and suddenly become a rabbi. He was actually a carpenter. He was someone who had a profession. He's someone who worked in the village. And then suddenly this time came where the carpenter was a rabbi, teaching people. And now the tax collectors say, does he pay the tax? And Peter, in his typical way, of course he does, wanting to please everyone. Yes, he does. Did Peter even know if Jesus paid the tax? Because he probably didn't know him a year before this. So Peter didn't have a clue. But of course he says, yes, let's make everyone feel okay, and I'll protect my rabbi. Now I wonder if Jesus heard him talking to the tax collectors at the door, or if Jesus being God, knew what was going on. Because it says there, does your teacher not pay the taxes? And Peter says yes. Yes, he does not, or yes, he does. I believe he was saying yes, he does pay the taxes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first. He didn't say, oh, Peter, what was that about? Who were the guys at the door? I heard them ringing or smacking the door knocker, whatever it was that they did to say hello in those days. He says, yeah. So what did you tell them? What do you think, Simon? What do you think? Do I pay the tax? Do you think I should pay the tax? And what do you think you would say? If you were walking with the Son of God, who you, by this stage, are pretty much sure is the Son of God, you know he's got something incredible about him. He said he's the Son. He said his Father is God. He's doing miracles left, right, and center. There's nothing normal about this guy. You know he's special. You know he's your rabbi, so he's exempt from the temple tax. Yet you say, yes, he does pay the temple tax. Are you mixed up? Are you confused? So Jesus asks him a simple question. What do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or taxes? And Jesus makes it pretty clear that the Father does not require tax from his own Son. Because Peter himself says, from others, not from the sons of the king. He gets toll from those who are not his children. And Jesus said to him, then the sons are free. The sons of the king. And when Jesus is talking about the sons of the king, who's he talking about? He's talking about the sons of the kingdom of heaven. The sons of righteousness. The sons of God. They are free from paying those human taxes. Are they? He could have claimed the rabbi's exemption, but he doesn't. Instead, he says, it's important that we don't offend them. How many times have you come up with a situation, and I know it even amongst my friends, where you get the situation comes up, someone makes a comment, they do something that goes against what you believe, it goes against what you feel compelled to have to put up with, and you stand up and you make some righteous Rick comment. Oh, but that's unright, and you have to do this, and you need to be saved, and you need to sort your life out, and you need to fix this, and we get all righteous, and we get all upset, and we offend them. This is the same coin, but the other side of what I talked about last week, when I said, does your gentleness, your way of being so culturally correct, stop you from telling the truth? Does your way of having to enforce the truth come through so harshly and so in such an ugly manner that it just causes unnecessary offense? Are you such a, what's the word? I can't even think of it. My mind has gone very blank today. I'm struggling for words. But are you so zealous that you jump up and you scream and shout what has to be, and you lose someone continually or lose someone for eternity because they're offended? Jesus says here, so that they won't be offended. When he talks about offense, he talks about the word scandalazon or scandalon. It's leaving a trap so that when someone walks along, they trip over that trap and they fall and they hurt themselves. You know you can never be offended. You can choose to take offense. I can never offend you. I can just leave a trap there, and you come along and you hit the trap and you get offended because you choose to fall over that trap. Because what I say is my own stupidity, and you don't have to take the bait. But Jesus says, in order to not let them have something to trip over, in order to not lay the bait for them to fall over it, let's do something unusual. In order to not be unnecessarily controversial, why don't we be considerate? Why don't we put something out there that will allow them to see that we're not trying to be difficult? Just give it a yank. It's a lovely sound, like fingers on a chalkboard. Thanks, Harold. So how does Jesus pay this tax? He could have said, hey, Judas, Waza, bring me the money, let's pay. Instead, by miraculous provision, Jesus pays the tax, but yet he still makes Peter do his part. You know, that's the way God works sometimes. He miraculously provides in a situation, but he still asks us to play our part. Whether that part is just having faith that he will come through, or applying our talents and our abilities and our skills, and actually engaging in work with the Father. Even when he miraculously provides, sometimes he asks that we engage as well. So he says to Peter, what does he say? He says, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. Now, can you picture the scene? Here's Peter. Now, Peter and Jesus are residents of Caesarea. Well, Peter and Jesus have been roaming for a while, but they're citizens of that region. So they are the only two amongst the apostles who actually have to pay this tax in Caesarea at the time. But Peter and Jesus, who are residents there, would have been well known. Peter was what? A professional fisherman. He was a fisherman who caught 253 fish in a net once. He was successful. He ran his own business. He paid all his taxes off. Boom. Because God gave him such an incredible catch of fish. This is the guy who has a reputation in the town of being very quick to speak, but also being reasonably good at doing his job. Now, this proud guy has got to walk down to the side of the river or the side of the sea, and instead of casting a net like he's so professional at doing, he's got to go and throw in a line and catch one fish at a time. How ridiculous, how humiliating. But yet God says, I will provide supernaturally, but I want you to take the humble road and do your part. And he does that. And we have to assume that he threw his line in. Maybe he waited a while, we don't know, but then he caught a fish. And the first fish he caught just so happened to have a coin in its mouth. Now, not every day a fish has a coin in its mouth. In fact, I bet you, almost guaranteed, nobody here has caught a fish with a 1 shekel coin in their mouth. Have you? Funnier things, no doubt. Maybe a shark might have an old treasure box in its mouth. But very unlikely. So this wasn't going to happen naturally. And it wasn't going to happen at all if Peter didn't go down and do something that he was well within his capability to do if he was humble enough to throw in a line and pull out a fish. And when he does it, what comes out is God's supernatural provision. Now, Jesus pays his tax, but how does he do it? He's exempt from paying the tax because he's a rabbi and because he's the father of the one to whom apparently the tax was meant to be sent for the temple tax. So why should the son have to pay a tax? So what he does is he exercises his royal right to dip into the royal treasury. And from the royal treasury, a shekel comes for him to give back to the royal treasury. So he obligates himself to pay the tax, and he obligates his father to provide it from his richest blessings. And that's how we can be obligated to do the things that God has purpose for us to do. We can do them by playing our part. We can do them by saying, we trust you, Father, to provide, and he provides from his riches and his storehouse for us to be able to provide that which is required of us to provide. And he only had to pay for the two of them because Peter and Jesus were the Caesareans. I'm not a Caesarean. Caleb is. No, but he had to pay for these two. So it wasn't that he had to try and find for 12, but the coin was enough to pay for the two of them. But think about what he was doing. One, Jesus didn't have to pay any price at all, yet he chose to pay that price. Two, Peter had to pay a price, but who paid the price for Peter? Jesus. You ever heard that before? Jesus at the end of his life, came to the cross not owing a single price to pay for sin. Yet he paid that price for sin, and he didn't need to. And the price he had to pay for that sin was his death, which he received from his Father, and the grace to give up his life he received from his Father. And he gave up his life. And by so doing, he paid forward for the life of Peter and Paul and Andrea and Madly and Zach and every one of us. He paid a price that he didn't have to pay. And he also, at the same time, by the way, paid your price. Fantastic foreshadow of what was to come. So simple. But Jesus says, look, in order that they might not look in the wrong direction, let's do something that allows them to see the provision of God. I don't know if Peter ever told that story to anybody else except Matthew. But the bottom line is we know about it today. And we know it points towards something greater. So we need to ask ourselves first, who are the sons of God? Who are the ones who are free from having to pay that sacrifice, that price, that tax? The sons of God are all those who call on his name, who believe on him, who believe on Jesus and call on his name because they are given the right to become children of God. Those were Jesus' words in John 1:12. To all those who called on him, to all those who believed in his name, he gave them the right to become sons of God. So that's who the sons of God are. The ones who receive from God the right to have their sins paid for from the royal treasury, from the life which was given to Jesus and then given up by Jesus for the sins he didn't have to pay for, but the sins we had to pay for. Those are the sons of God. And if we haven't found ourselves in that position, that we've believed on him, that we've trusted in his name, we don't fall into that category of being the sons of God, the sons of the King who are free. But all it takes is for us to call on him, to believe on him, and to put our lives in his trust. And then an opportunity will come when we have to do our part. When something simple comes along and God says, I will provide, but I want you to engage in something possibly even humbling. And we can engage in that and do our part. It makes me think of tax and money when I read the story, because it is about tax and money. It makes you think about the temple tax. It was a Jewish tradition. We learned last week about the Jewish nation being ruled by a parliament which consisted of the temple leaders, the scribes, the Pharisees, the high priest, the captain of the temple, who would be able to control what was happening in the temple grounds and in the place of worship. They were the ones who could make the decisions for the nation. They were the parliament. And that was how the nation was run. It was ruled, and a tax was required to pay for that parliament, to pay for that operation, for that organization to go. And what was the source of the money that Jesus had to pay? From his Father. What's the source of your money? What's the source of your provision, of how you live your life? How you pay for the day-to-day, just buying milk and bread? Where does that come from? I find myself often remembering that I mustn't look to my company to provide. Even the job that I have is provided by God. The particular situation that I'm in right now has been engineered by the Father. But even if it was a job that I hated, if it was a job that I didn't think was appropriate, I've got to acknowledge that God opened a door for me to walk into it. And I've got to realize that every month, when that money rolls into my bank account, even if it says the name of my company next to the deposit, I know that's not where it's coming from. I know that my source is God the Father. Okay, and if my source is the Father, and it's supernaturally provided to me by my Father, it's something coming from the treasury of heaven. And I'm able to give back to the treasury of heaven only because I receive from the treasury of heaven, so I can give back to the treasury of heaven. And it made me think about tithing. Where's the source of my blessing? The source of my blessing is not the company I work for, because I could leave there tomorrow and go to another company and still have cash arriving in my bank account. But it would still not be a blessing if it wasn't from my Father. If it was merely money, it wouldn't be building something in my life and in my family's life that was for eternal purposes. It would be something that would just be cash to pay for the things of the day. But I know that it has come from my Father. I know that by my putting my heart and my focus into who God is, being thankful for the work I have, and being able to work there, I'm doing something that is unto His glory. I'm doing something that is unto His greatness, and something that declares and recognizes His work in my life. And by so doing, I'm building something eternal. And then He rewards me by reminding me that my provision comes from Him. And it's a really amazing thing that many people here in this room tithe to the local church. They understand the concept of giving to a place where their heart is, where their treasure is, where their teaching comes from, where their support, their family is found. And they give to the local church not as a religion, not as a tax, but with the understanding that by our not holding tightly to that 100% that comes in, given to us by Father, but by releasing something always, every month, we open up a tap of generosity that mimics and copies how generous our Father is. And when there's an open purse, that some can flow in this side and some flows out the other side, that tithes go out and gifts and offerings go out, there's always room for more to flow in. It doesn't ever get plugged full. So while there's an open hole that isn't a leak, but it's channeled and it flows in the right direction, so the top of the funnel can always be filled up again when God needs to fill it. And I want to encourage you that if you hadn't understood that, if you haven't been able to engage in the principle of tithing and giving offerings over and above your tithe, I want to challenge you to take a chance and see what happens when you start doing it. To see how God opens up a storehouse of His blessing that flows into our little storehouse, our mini storehouse of our own home and our family. And it flows out the other end, and a happy cash flow starts happening, where fresh stuff starts flowing through that pipeline. And there's an overflow of blessing, and there's a freedom that comes from it. We aren't obligated to pay a tax, a temple tax, or something that God requires by some Old Testament law. Not at all. But by opening the other end of the pipeline that God's feeding, we allow generosity and freshness to flow through it. God is my provider, not the world, even though the world needs money to make it go round. But God provides for me what I need. It would be fantastic if we didn't actually need money to transact in this world, but we could just, if everything was perfect and sustainable development and whatever else, and we could just have everything we wanted, living in a place that all flowed through, everything we needed, provided, that our chickens did their job and our cows did their job and our water stream did everything, and it just flowed through, and we had no need to find outside sources for clothing. Unfortunately, we've forgotten how to do that as humans. We do need to buy our clothes in shops, because I certainly couldn't make my own. But regardless of that, if we acknowledge God as the source and not the world as providing us with cash, it becomes a lot easier to see that flow of generosity and God's provision. You heard the saying, put your money where your mouth is. Where was that money? It was in the mouth of the fish. Well, if I can have money in my mouth because I'm something that provides something to the world around me, that I've put myself in the right place for God to come and provide a blessing that through me I can provide, that I can give, that I can sow, that I can have a heart of generosity because I know what it is to give, then God can use me in greater ways than cash. He can use me in ways of providing my time, my talent, my treasures, releasing those things because I don't hold on to them so tightly, but they can be available to be used by the whole world as well as the kingdom. And God can use them in ways that can develop and build and freshly grow things because I'm not holding so tightly onto them. What about the tax and the actions of the day? What's the government asking of you right now? Do you always have to disobey when the government asks you to do something? Or are there some times when, so in order not to offend, you will do this thing? I'm not saying we should have a compromised confession and a compromised witness, that we do things like lemmings, just do it because that's what you get told to do, like a battery chicken that knows if its head against this, the food comes and the water comes when you do that. But there are some things that aren't part of the kingdom of darkness. They might not be part of the kingdom of light, but they're not offensive things. And we don't have to resist for the sake of resisting, just so that we can be rebels and not be considered part of the world. We live in this world. We need to engage with the people of the world. And even Jesus himself said, in order to not offend them, in this particular battle, it's not worth fighting. There are some things that will actually unlock doors for you to go in and be able to share a bigger picture. Some things are so trivial and small that will cause a division and a divide that will stop you getting an opportunity to share your witness. And by just paying that fee and getting through the door, suddenly you find yourself in a place where you would not have been able to be, and you have an opportunity to witness and to share and to give in a manner that you couldn't have done without engaging in that action. So if something that comes along that you may have to make a concession in, what's the best thing we can do? I say ask God. Ask him, Dad, do I not do this, or do I do this? Or rather, ask him a yes-no question. It's a lot easier to hear the difference between yes and no than 3 or 4 options, unless you've got really good at listening to God. Some people can just have a fabulous conversation, and in all things, they know exactly what God's saying. I find that hard sometimes. So sometimes I have to ask God a yes-no question. God, do you want me to do this? And he says yes. Okay, and I do it. Or do you want me to do this? And he says no, and I don't do it. I think we need to ask God these questions more often. We need to get to the point, God, am I meant to be doing this? But do you need validation of every single thing we do, including tolerance or peacemaker gift releasing? When there's an opportunity to bring peace, to bring an opportunity for reconciliation, to open up discussion, to release a platform where you have the opportunity to share your life with someone, do you need God's permission to do that? Or do you just do what Jesus didn't told us to do, that we are peacemakers? Blessed are we when we are peacemakers, where we come in and we create the situation where suddenly a door opens and a discussion and a conversation can commence because we've made the decision to lay ourselves down. I'm seeing it more and more as I deal more and more with teenagers for a second time. I had a great little break, of a couple of years with no teenagers, because Cucullin got out of teenagerism at about 16, and Kelsey was gone by then as far as teenagers go. And then we had that break, and now we're back in it. And I'm realizing, you know what? It's not so easy to lay down your life for the others. And we've got a lot of decisions to make in the world around us. Lots of discussions about vaccines and about caring for one another. And you know what? We need to be able to look out for one another and honor one another above ourselves, but not be so caught up and so paranoid in things of fear and things that are not really a concern. But let's not fight those battles that aren't worth fighting, that aren't of eternal consequence. Those things that aren't going to determine someone's salvation, that aren't going to stop the kingdom of God from moving. Let's take a moment to chill and relax a little bit more and open that doorway for discussion. Let's choose not to offend for the sake of offense. To be able to build a bridge that you can walk over and draw someone back over with you to say, hey, let's engage in discussion. What is God saying about this? Or can I tell you a story about God's provision to me? You might not understand it, but I tried this, and look what my dad did. And we share that opportunity because God opens the door. There will be opportunities we have. There will be situations we face where we can say, no, I flatly refuse because I'm offended by that. And that's when we need to go to the Father and say, Lord, is this a black and white matter for you? Do I need to make a stand on this? Or do I actually need to consider that maybe I need to humble myself and allow this situation to be something that I will go as a professional fisherman who is used to casting in a net and catching 50 and 200 fish, and I will throw in my line and look like a wally until I bring a single fish out, because I know in doing that, I'm going to have an opportunity to witness to someone. This tax was provided by God, and I give it to you willingly, even though the person for whom I'm paying does not need to pay it. We want to do this to honor you and to release an opportunity to speak into that situation. So I want to encourage you with that. There'll be circumstances that we face. Let's not just assume that God wouldn't expect that of us. But let's ask him. Let's say, Father, what do you say about this? Let's engage in that discussion. Let's give a chance to God to actually direct us into circumstances and situations where we see the miraculous, where we see things opening up because of God's provision. And the conversation and the discussion can lead to the truth of who he is. This Jesus that we sang about. This Jesus who is everything. Let's make opportunities for that conversation to be released in more and more circumstances. Amen. That's all. We've had a fabulous day. I've had a fabulous weekend. My wife didn't testify to it, but she says she's bought the best birthday present she's ever bought for herself. She had the greatest time of her life yesterday floating around on the ocean. And I'm so chuffed she's found something she likes. And one day when I find a core, I'll be able to enjoy it as much as she does. But I'll have to go and find my core again. But I want to encourage you guys, if you are finding yourself this week in a situation where you need to connect with someone, don't just hide away. And also don't expect that someone's going to reach out and grab hold of you. Some of us are slow to understand. Some of us are slow to respond. Feel free to pick up the phone and give someone a ring. Let's connect. Let's connect for coffee. Let's connect on the phone. Let's connect in some way. Cell groups are starting up. There's a cell group running on a Wednesday night. There's going to be another one starting soon. Let's start connecting amongst one another and seeing how we can encourage one another with what's happened between us and God during the week. And let's see how we can spur one another on to love and good deeds. To see how we can work with God hand in hand to engage in those things he's prepared in advance for us to do. Because there's so much out there we can get stuck into. There's so much that we can do to extend the kingdom, and it's not that difficult.